Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. We have so much to get to on today's show. Rookies have officially reported for Miami Dolphins training camp. And you know what that means? Absolutely nothing. It means nothing to us as fans, but we have veterans reporting next week, which means we should have a steady stream of depth chart, injury, and other news within the next 10 days or so. Joshua Houtz, we have survived the offseason of not having a lot of news. How you doing today?
Great, man. That's what I was going to say. It doesn't mean anything, but at the same time, it means we got through this, this quote unquote break, and it didn't really feel like that. We all know the different things that continue to circulate, but dude, rookies are back. Again, it doesn't mean anything, but we'll all get hyped the first time we see Malik Washington catch a pass in shorts with no one covering. We'll get all hyped about that.
Looking ahead, we have Kat coming back. It's been a few weeks. Super apologize for that. Kat will be back with us for our Monday show. We are planning a 53-man roster update, so that will be our 2.0 version of that. But Josh, you mentioned it. There have been some things lingering throughout the offseason, and we might as well do it at this point, a Tua Tagovailoa contract update. I've noticed that all the quote-unquote insiders have their own show. So it's kind of at the point where we hear the same things over and over. But the fact we're not hearing anything negative, I still think is a good sign for the Miami Dolphins and a contract extension for Tua. Rappaport basically came out and said there's a deal to be made by the offers that have been made. Tua is their guy, and it's about finding the right number. He mentioned that there is going to be a 5 to start that contract, somewhere in the $50 million range. I think that's not much of a surprise. But it's about finding the right number and potentially finalizing a deal before training camp. Josh, nothing groundbreaking there, but does anything stick out?
Other than I just wish I was Ian Rappaport and people loved me so much that, they could hang on my every word, that you could literally say nothing and somehow we're, sitting here talking about. Because, it does sound like, both sides are still trying to get something done, which I guess is the biggest takeaway from here. But, they're hoping to get something finalized before camp. The two sides are going back and forth. Okay, yes, we know how contract negotiations work. So I think I speak for every Dolphins fan where, whether you think Tua's the guy, whether you don't, I feel like this thing just needs to get done. And we need to find a middle ground here. We need to get this thing done and move forth because, again, this is some of the better teams we've had in years. And to have this linger over and be that dark cloud heading into this year after what they did last year, that's not what we want, right, as Dolphin fans heading into the season.
So I've started to go back and watch some old games, and, you completely understand why there's some sort of debate here about extending Tua long-term or not. However, when you look at how Tua is in the system and you look about how Tua works with Mike McDaniel and you look at how Mike McDaniel works at Tua, that's the type of synergy you need to win a Super Bowl. I died a little bit inside saying synergy right there, but that's why I think this contract needs to get done. Obviously, nothing has really changed in terms of our opinions. There have been no games played or anything like that. But Josh, were you surprised to hear that, rookies have reported? Vets report to training camp next week. And Rappaport did say, they're on the cliff of reaching that deal where, are you surprised to know that there could be a chance before training camp that a deal still comes in?
I guess not, because, at this point, Tua's leverage is probably that he's going to miss out, right? He's going to hold out and not show up and things like that. So maybe this is that hard deadline where, look, they think that Tua's saying this stuff just to say it, just to get a deal done. If it comes to the point and Tua has to prove, I'm going to sit out, right? You guys are going to have to make this deal, whether you like it or not. So I'm not surprised. I do think that's that hard deadline. But for me, it all comes down to that day, right? We used to joke and we had Dolphins Twitter in an uproar when Tua wasn't the first guy in camp. Now we're going to have an entirely different uproar if Tua is in camp or is not, because, again, he's that franchise quarterback, whether you like it or not. And to have this deal lingering over the head of Tua Tagovailoa while other guys got paid, it's not fair to the player or his teammates. But, again, it's a business. And we understand, like you said, both sides. We just wish that it would get done sooner than later.
Do you think Tua would sit out if he doesn't have a contract?
I want to say no, but athletes first. You want to get that contract. You want to prove to the Dolphins that you're serious. You have to do that at this point. And I think someone did the breakdown of how much money he'd lose over the days if he sat out. I think it would be peanuts compared to, the contract he'd eventually make. So, if you have to sit out early on to make an additional $5-10 million down the road, who could fault him for that? But it's Tua Tagovailoa, and he has the heart of gold, it seems. So, yeah, that'd be the real question. Is Tua Tagovailoa that type of guy that would, put himself first, I guess, which no one could really blame him if he was.
No one could blame him at all, but I don't know if it's just the homer, still 10-year-old Dolphin fan in me that's still deep in there. That's like, yeah, man, he's our quarterback. He'll no doubt he'll still be out there. I don't know if that's like,
Ohana, baby.
yeah, like there's a huge part of me that, based off of everything Tua has done throughout his entire career, tells me that I think he'd still be there. However, it's something we're gonna figure out in about a week or so. Last question on this, Josh, and we'll get into some injury news. How long would Tua have to sit out before you genuinely get concerned? Like, all right, we're a little worried about this offense going into the start of the season, when you're talking about timing and different things like that, where that's the key to making this offense successful.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you don't want him to miss any time with some of these new pieces, Jonnu Smith, right, Odell Beckham Jr., but that's just the cliche answer. I mean, this seems to be his second language at this point. He's the guy that, like you said earlier in this pod, can run this offense, better than anyone else. So I guess if it hit that first preseason game, right, I can't think back to somebody holding out for the Dolphins that even like had any meaning to us that I can remember a guy missing a preseason game or something like that. So I guess after that, I'd start to, oh shit, we're serious here. How long could this thing go on? You did mention it, Jake, about Tua not being that guy. We both said maybe not being that guy to sit out, but how much that early stuff that he had to go through, right? The turmoil with Brian Flores, Deshaun Watson, things like that. This still lingers in the back of his head. And he's like, okay, well, if they were ready to cast me aside just like that and do this to me, then maybe it's in my best interest to hold out. But again, it just sucks. I guess it's a good problem to have, right? When you finally have a quarterback that you need to pay in this situation, you just wish you would have done those things that makes him a top 3, top 5 paid quarterback.
Win one playoff game and we're not having any sort of conversation like that. Just swings everything.
That's all it is, and that's proof that it shouldn't matter, right? If that's all it would have taken. I mean, they played in Winterfell, man. Like, we can't fault anybody for losing to Patty Mahomes in that weather. But yeah, you're right. One playoff game would change our entire, and that's not right.
Josh, we do have some injury news to kickstart training camp. Let's start with the good. Let's start with future Hall of Famer Jaylen Phillips, who was looking like an absolute stud. You wrote a story about this on the Finsider. Basically, what came out is he released a training video ahead of training camp, and man, he is looking really good.
Yeah, man. I mean, and we can go back and clip it. I think you and I literally joked that this guy was going to be in the Ring of Honor and the Hall of Fame, the first time we saw him. I mean, this dude is a superhuman. So I'm not surprised he's out there running these ladder, drills and doing some of the sprints we saw today on Twitter. I think so many people are posting that. He was running then this morning. So he's built different. We clearly see that. And to think how this defense could change, just Jaylen Phillips with just Jaylen Phillips, right? With a player like Jaylen Phillips, if he were to start the season, that would change everything, at least my early mentality. So I love to see this. It gets me hyped because, again, it just shows you what type of freak Jaylen Phillips is. And as we talk about that, that's another guy that's going to need to get played down the road, right?
I was just thinking that is exactly the thought process you got to have. A big season from Jaylen Phillips, and you're talking about a big contract. He had 6.5 sacks last season. He had 4 in 3 games before suffering the Achilles injury against the Jets. Josh, I was kind of surprised because if, do some hard math here. 3 games, that's 4 sacks. That means entering that 3-game stretch, he was sitting there with 2.5 sacks, but it kind of seemed like he turned into one of those players that despite the 2.5 sacks, we weren't really griping or where's Jaylen Phillips? I think that just kind of spoke to the well-rounded player he was turning into, where if he's somebody you can have on opening day, how long? Wow, and I can't even believe I'm asking this coming off an Achilles injury, so I'm going to lower the expectations a little bit. But Josh, is there any reasonable standard where you could see him turning into one of those players who's the most well-rounded guy on that defense, maybe the anchor of that defense since Christian Wilkins is gone?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that could really hinder him, like you mentioned, is him coming back. I know a lot of these players, it sometimes takes a full season for them to truly get back into that form, but even Jaylen Phillips, not at that same form, is still, one of the better players on this defense. I think what I love so much about him is his growth throughout his career. I think early in his year, he wasn't so good against the run. I think he took that to heart. Coming off the field early on, he admitted that it was something he didn't want to do, for his teammates next to him. So he's come into that guy that can, set the edge. He's, we talk about him being an absolute overpowered when he moves inside to a guard. We see him taking on double teams. So yeah, man, I already think he's one of the best edge players in football. I guess right now you just need to see him string together some healthy seasons, because as much as we don't want to talk about, this is a guy who at one point had to medically retire, I guess, from UCLA because of the concussions. We see the injuries that he suffered early on in his career, and that's just what these freak athletes do. But it was a freak injury. Love to see him back. And after 4 months, man, I could just imagine, I'd probably be in a wheelchair. I'd be milking this thing for a year, and he's out there, he's ready to go hunt down Trevor Lawrence in week 1. I mean, I absolutely love to see it. But as we have to say, temper your expectations. This is still not certain that he starts the year, but just to see him looking like this, got to get you excited.
Since you're talking about tempering your expectations, he had a career high 8.5 sacks as a rookie. That's something he would have beaten last year, I think, if he finished the year. Career high 61 tackles in 2022. I think that's something else he would have beaten if he remained healthy for the entire year. And to keep in mind, like going back to last year, I just said it, 4 sacks in 3 games. He went on a similar heater in his rookie year. Josh, when you're talking about the playoffs and you're talking about that January, December football, different things like that, you just need to get hot at the right time. And we've already seen Jaylen Phillips do that, get hot late in the season. And I think that's where the Dolphins would love to kind of ride the lightning with someone like him. Any final thoughts here on Jaylen Phillips after watching that video? Anything like that?
I just want to say I don't think my camera is that good quality, but dude, like it just goes to show you that we're fans because you're just sitting here talking about Jaylen Phillips, hearing about what he could become. I mean, I've said it before. This is one of my favorite players, but I'm like legit getting goosebumps just thinking about it. So I just had to throw that out there because it just shows the type of fans we are. It's just so awesome to see. But in that same sense, Jake, when the rookies report, they do the physicals and things like that. And sometimes these guys aren't medically cleared. So, with the good comes the bad. And I wrote an article up real quick for the Finsider earlier today, and the Dolphins did have to place 2 guys on the physically unable to perform list. Or wait, let me say this again. They had to place safety Mark Perry from TCU on the active non-football injury list, and then wide receiver Taj Washington on the active physically unable to perform list. Hopefully you can give me better clarification on what those exactly mean. But I'm sitting here talking about a hype thing for Jaylen Phillips. Taj Washington was a guy that I've been giddy for all season long. So to hear that he was on the active physically unable to perform list was a little bit of a hit to my heart, but we didn't think that he was maybe going to make the 53-man anyway. So give me a little bit of thoughts on Jake on what those roster exempts mean and things like that.
So let's start with Mark Perry, who is on the active non-football injury list. And it's pretty much what it said. The injury or condition did not occur during NFL practices, games, and or team-sanctioned activities. Players on the active non-football injury list, are not allowed to practice with the team until they are medically cleared. However, they can still attend meetings and partake in other non-physical team activities. If the player, and this is probably the most important part, if the player remains on the list by the time the regular season starts, they can be placed on the reserve NFI list, which requires missing a minimum of 6 weeks. And then you have Taj Washington, who is on the PUP list, active, physically unable to perform list, had the injury coming into camp, and it was something that happened during football-related activities. If the player is still on the PUP list to start the regular season, they must be placed on the reserve PUP list, which mandates missing at least the first 6 weeks of the season. However, another key difference, the salary of that player must be paid. So basically, to sum it up here, Mark Perry's injury, based on what we know, happened outside of the football field. And then for Taj Washington, that is a football-related injury. Either way, these are going to be 2 guys we're watching early on to see if they can make a recovery quick enough to have some sort of impact in training camp.
Yeah, I mean, and those were 2 guys that I think we discussed, throughout the podcast, throughout the offseason. Mark Perry, a safety, a defensive back that we thought might be able to have some type of role, could, maybe surprise some folks, fit in there with special teams as well as Taj Washington. I mean, he was a player that I've been trying to temper my expectations, like you said. But thank you so much for reading off what that meant, because we've heard the PUP, we've heard different things, but it's nice to clarify exactly what it means, for the Dolphins' sake, because getting some of these players back, maybe later in the season when you need guy out there on special teams, could be the world of a difference. So any last thoughts on either of those guys, Jake? What about you want to throw out their stats while you have written down there?
Yeah, so Mark Perry played the last 2 seasons at TCU. We're going to have a lot of these guys throughout the next couple months that you're trying to keep track of. Of course, you have 90 men on the roster that you're trying to figure out. He was all Big 12 as a senior, and you wonder, since the Dolphins drafted a safety late, Patrick McMorris in the 6th round, you wonder if there is a pathway for one of these late round and drafted safeties to make a spot on the roster. So that'll be something to keep in mind with him. Taj Washington played 39 games with 30 starts over 3 seasons at USC. He caught 163 receptions for 2,449 yards. That's 15 yards per reception, along with 15 touchdowns. Josh, this is probably not the way we want to talk about injuries here on Another Dolphins podcast, but I do wonder here if this could be a workaround where if Taj Washington has to go on IR, if he's someone who's going to miss the start of the season, this is a way the Dolphins might be able to protect him. Not only are they being safe from an injury, but this is someone they could kind of hold on to. He wouldn't necessarily take up a roster spot. You wouldn't have to risk him going onto the practice squad. So that might be something to keep in mind here with Taj Washington. If the Dolphins decide to be extremely safe with him throughout all of training camp. Maybe we don't see too much of him. Would be very disappointing because I think he could have an impact, not necessarily as a receiver, as a rookie, but as a special teams ace, somebody who can be out there for one of the units that was probably one of the worst in the leagues, being the Miami Dolphins special teams unit. So that'll be interesting to see if Taj Washington can fight his way onto the field, or if the Dolphins are going to be safe. One, protect their draft pick. Two, maybe it's a way to kind of secure a roster spot for him long-term.
Yeah, great point. I mean, that was one of the first things I thought, because it was going to be a long shot for him to make the roster, right? The wide receivers are absolutely stacked. We know there could be some spots available later down the road. And you mentioned it being a draft pick, right? They used a 7th round pick on him. So there had to be something there that they liked. If this is a way to protect him, I'm all for it. But, both these players being a little bit hyped for what they could do with rookie mini camps coming up. Those were some of those guys you want to see. Iron sharpens iron, see what they could do. It's a little bit, it sucks to see them, but end up on these lists. But like you mentioned, man, if we see Taj Washington later down the road, I mean, I'm already hyped for him. He's my Isaiah Ford, Preston Williams, Lynn Bowden Jr. I already put that stamp there, so hyped for it. But it sucks to see it happen now.
Yeah, the key here is just if they aren't on the field by the regular season, they at least have to miss 6 weeks, and then we can go from there. Those are probably the biggest takeaways as we sit here in the middle of July. Josh, it's the middle of July, so that means NCAA College Football 25 is out. I actually didn't purchase it yet. I go through those waves with football video games where I get into the hype, but it only lasts a day or two. So I wanted to kind of wait and see how it's going. So Josh, how's NCAA football going for you through 2-3 days here?
Yeah, man. I mean, I get into that every year, whether it's Madden, whether it's, college football. It's been, 10 years since we went for it, but you always get hyped up, right? We see the clips, but I have to be honest, whatever they did to it, I don't know if you played any of the recent next-gen Maddens, but you could kind of see the gameplay starting to get there. They were starting to do things right. I think they finally hit it here with NCAA. I mean, it's the control that you have when you're the ball carrier, things like that. It just seems like it's going to be crazy to play. And then the dynasty mode, I mean, it's absolutely in depth. I think you can go 30 years or something like that. Ooh. Haven't touched into that too much, but overall, I mean, it seems like it's everything that fans wanted and more. And the one day I'm 37. I think I slept 2 hours 2 nights ago. It would have been 48 hours I was up, and I think I slept 2 hours that entire time because I just was staying up playing, because it really is that good of a game. So maybe wait till it drops, Jake, but hell yeah, man. College football is awesome this year.
Would you create a player? Is that what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, you do Road to Glory, so you create a player, then you just play that position. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I think you can play defense. I'm going to start with a running back. They want me to write an article for Operation Sports, so I'm going to do a running back. Then I'll probably do a middle linebacker to try to see the different things, the different journeys you can go. So keep an eye on that. I'll do a breakdown on that over the next few weeks or so. But I've been using Penn State online, and some games I get murked, some games I play pretty close ones. I think the best game I had, it was UCF versus Miami. Went to overtime. I went down there. I was going to go for 2 so I go to bed. It was 3 a.m, and dude dropped it. My guy called it, took a hit and dropped it, and I was gut-wrenched. But, dude, it got me hot. And that's just playing random guys online. So, you get it, me and you playing. I mean, I remember we played Madden before. Those were some fun games, and now we're even playing Rocket League. We should probably do some Rocket League streams, Jake. And did you mention best ball? Did you mention best ball yet, or are you just talking about college football? Did we get there yet?
Oh, no, we didn't get there yet. One more thing I wanted to ask you about college football is, so I'm a fan of making things difficult and the growth needed. If your player sucks at the start, your player sucks at the start. I saw some videos of if you're an underdog middle linebacker and different things like that. It sucks. Running backs are going to run right by you. You're going to get plowed over. However, the one thing I think that they've gone a little too far with is, how do you feel about field goal kicking? Because I understand making it harder than what Madden is, but I do feel like there's a middle ground where that thing's shaking so much. It's like a palm tree in a hurricane. The amount of shanks I've seen just from random 30-yard field goals. I think that's one area that, just based on watching people play, they might have taken just a little bit too far.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think I was Penn State versus Alabama, and I lost 13-14 because earlier in the game I missed an extra point. So yeah, that thing, I mean, it's we've seen it before in Madden and stuff, last second field goals, it would be going crazy, but they have it for almost every kick. So you got to be almost like a surgeon or a doctor. And you mentioned Road to Glory, some of those low rated players. It's some of those TikToks, man, they're hilarious. The guy wants to be like a cornerback. He's like, I'm never playing for Kennesaw State or whatever. It's fun. And I guess that's what's so exciting about it. You see all these people all over the globe, just getting hyped. There's 600,000 people playing, and the game didn't even officially release yet. So Yeah, man, I like it.
And it's so cool that everyone's doing different things. Like there's a storytelling aspect. Like instead of just Madden where it's like, all right, log in, play your games. Like the fact you can just do stupid little things. Like I think I saw a video where there was like a cornerback who got like too engaged with the crowd and just got absolutely cooked on the play. And just like little things like that where it's kind of funny. So shout out
Crawling
college
in
football.
DMs.
You can
It took
crawl
them
in
11
the
years though. It took them 11 years though. So a shout out to them. But like, I feel like Madden, like we joked, they need to take like a 10-year hiatus or something and get back to us with a franchise mode like this, because everything about it's good, at least for now. But there are some people griping about it because it is similar to those next gen Maddens and things like that. But yeah, man, there's a lot of good stuff that's come with it, and there's gonna be a lot more stuff that drops when it comes out officially July 19th. So check it out.
And and none of these updates, like crawling into DMs, like none of it's galaxy brain. Like none of this should have taken 10 years, right? And I think that's kind of still the thing that's frustrating. Like it's not like they completely revolutionized the football industry with this game. Like they just made the updates that make it feel like it's 2024. It can be a little goofy while still being a serious video game. So I think that's kind of a relief and still, I guess, kind of annoying at the same time, but it is what it is. I'm glad everyone's having fun. Josh, I did want to bring up best ball here for a minute because I've done it. I started going into Underdog. I don't know if you've done a lot of best ball leagues in your time. So just for our listeners, it's basically a fantasy football format where you draft and that's it. You draft 18 players. There's no waivers, no trades, no nothing. You just let the season ride. It puts together your best lineup every week. And you know, I mentioned it earlier in the show. I started watching some games. I started doing some drafts. I got that itch, and man, I felt like such a boomer. I got into my first draft. It was called the Fast Puppy because you only get 20 seconds per pick. It was like $5 entries. I'm like, yeah, this is a fun way to dip your toe back in. I tried to find my bye week and I couldn't. Somehow I left the draft, and before I knew it, I was signed up for another draft. So all of a sudden I was in 2 fast puppies, which was an absolute mess. I'm like just sitting there. It's like 9:00 at night. I'm like, yeah, I'll sit back, get a vibe for fantasy football, see where players are getting drafted. And all of a sudden I'm trying to do 4 picks in 40 seconds. So man, that was super stressful. But let me hear it, man. Have you started any best balls, anything like that so far?
I haven't yet. I do a bunch of them, especially on Underdog. Like you mentioned, man, if you haven't played it, you have to, because it's, I don't want to say the greatest thing in the
Not a
world, but I
sponsor
mean,
either.
yeah, no, not, we should try to get that as a sponsor, but they are, they're second. I absolutely love it. I think I started when they first came out, and you'll sit there and it's nice, even if you're just in regular fantasy drafts, right? You do a slow draft. It kind of shows you where some of these players may get drafted, helps you as almost like a mock draft for, your home leagues and things like that. But like you said, man, you just draft and then let it go. So maybe I did do one, but I've been trying not to upload the money yet, because as soon as I do, then like you said, you're in a $5 puppy. I think there's some of the bigger puppies are like $25, and saying all that, I think they would be awesome to sit here and do one together, Jake, at some point. Maybe we just, stream. Every time I do one of those, we'll be sniping Dolphins players. But yeah, I'm down for that. So yeah, man, that's sick. You're gonna get me inspired to go do some fast puppies, but I'll make sure I don't do 2 at a time like you did. How many Dolphin players did you come away with? You didn't. Tell us how many did you come away with. Did you get anybody?
So I started with those 2, and now I've done 6. so I do.
Wow,
I
that's
do
how
have
they
some
get you.
help.
That's how they get you.
Dude, Jaylen Waddle in the middle of the second round, I think, is such a monster pick, because when I was going back and watching some games recently, it's so hard not to look at those Jets games about how the Dolphins killed them. And, you see in the game where the Dolphins won 30-0, you see Tyreek on the sideline and Jaylen Waddle just being an absolute monster against one of the best defenses in the league. My best advice, and I know Dolphin fans don't need to hear this, is if you get Jaylen Waddle, he's still on the board mid-second round, get him. Get him. And this is such a weird year because I've done a few of these now. You're going to want to take a running back early. You'll see like a Bijan Robinson sitting there. I had Christian McCaffrey fall to me at 3 in one draft because I think it went like CD Lamb, Jamar Chase, and then I got McCaffrey. But if you do that, you run out of value at wide receiver so fast where you're begging like a Calvin Ridley to be your wide receiver too, something like that. And it's no fun. So I think my biggest word of advice is if there are people out there trying to like get into these best balls or just starting, be very careful about early round running backs, because the wide receiver depth is just, it runs out pretty quickly.
I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people do it, right? You stack players for teams, a quarterback or a wide receiver, things like that. I mean, in these things, a lot of it is just, getting lucky and hitting on some of those players that other people did not. Rookie wide receivers, I load up on them. You mentioned the running backs. You always try to get one of those elite guys and then, fill it in there with some guys that could start. Maybe some of those guys that could, see a role if there were injuries. So, I'm not getting goosebumps yet, but I'm getting excited talking about best ball. Just make sure, like Jake said, you I guess limit yourself, right? We don't need anybody getting into 15, 50 best balls, but there are definitely people out there. I mean, I actually prefer best ball. I think the older I get to, the more common leagues, because you can just draft, sit back, relax, and some of those prizes are no joke.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think for fantasy leagues, I want to limit to myself 3, maybe 4 max, just because it's crazy and it's so frustrating. Like you'll go and you'll do all your waiver transactions, and like you have your Pepe Silvia moment, you have your entire board lined up, and you have everything figured out. And then you just got to go do it again with 2 other leagues. It gets super annoying pretty quickly. So maybe that's how we'll make millions. It's such a chore. Maybe that's how we make our millions. We make some sort of code that it can go between every app, and it just submits your waivers and how you want to do things in all your leagues, so you don't have to go in. Somebody help us out with that. I think
I'm cutting that out. That's a genius idea. We should start investing time in that.
Best ball, NCAA football. We're watching games, man. Football's back. I'm gonna say that a bunch moving forward. Like the rookies arriving literally means nothing, but it's July 17th. We're gonna start getting social media posts every day. The beat writers, Josh, we made our friendships built on these training camp updates, and I'm excited to have it all back. Speaking of training camp and speaking towards what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, Josh, the Dolphins, their joint practices have been announced. They're going to be doing joint practices with the Atlanta Falcons, the Washington Commanders, and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It's pretty impressive to kind of look at what the Dolphins are doing, because that's 7 of 9 opponents in the Mike McDaniel era that they've done preseason joint practices with through 3 seasons here.
Yeah, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this is only something that's kind of, gained steam over the last, 5, 6 years. I can't remember when it started, but these joint practices, it just started with a few teams, and now it's starting to come out. We're seeing, I think the Dolphins did one early on in the Brian Flores area. I still go back to seeing Xavier Howard get cooked by Calvin Ridley on like a triple, quadruple move. But we love this. We eat this stuff up. What's better than seeing Cam Smith highlight getting beat by, Jalen Waddle, and seeing Jalen Waddle beat an Atlanta Falcon cornerback or things like that, right? So I'm sorry I use Cam Smith as an example, but you know what I mean. It's better to see what we're doing against other teams than our own guys getting fried egg and cheese sandwiched on the sideline. So Dolphins are really going all out. They have one with all of their opponents this year, and I'm intrigued to see, I guess it's more of an insider's thing, what Mike McDaniel and them are doing, but I wonder how much the joint practice has changed from there to the preseason game that they play. Like, are they then going in and fine tuning things, adjusting their game plan, you would imagine, as if it were a game day. And that's part of what is so exciting to me. So stoked to see some of these matchups, Jake. And like you said, man, we'll be eating up every single, completion that we see on the timeline. We just hope Tua's there to take part in these.
There will be 22 joint session practices between teams. The Dolphins are in 3 of those. Josh, let's start with the Atlanta Falcons. They arrived to Miami Gardens on August 6th. Give me one player that you cannot wait to see the Dolphins go up against. I don't even want to cop out for you here, but I think it's a pretty easy answer when you think about Anthony Weaver, a new defense coming into Miami.
Well, who are you gonna say? You just give me yours. I want to hear your answer first.
It's got to be Bijan, right? If we see the Atlanta Falcons posting a bunch of highlights of Bijan Robinson running crazy, I'm not going to be too nervous because it's August 6th. It's a month before the season starts. However, if we aren't seeing a lot of Bijan Robinson hype after that first week of the preseason and training camp, I don't know what we're supposed to call this because it's still training camp and the preseason at the same time. But if we're not hearing a lot of Bijan Robinson hype, man, I think that's going to be a really good sign early on.
Oh, yeah. And whether it is or not, we'll still be getting overly hyped. I guess I'll go a different way. I originally thought Drake London maybe just see the corners, but let's go with Kyle Pitts, right? Here he's, lining up at wide receiver as well as tight end. We all gushed over him coming out, being this mismatch nightmare. Let's see the way he lines up with a Jalen Ramsey, Javon Holland, Kendall Fuller, whatever it is. So that would be mine. What about you for the next one, Jake? The Washington Commanders. The Dolphins host the Washington Commanders on August 15th. What matchup are you really looking at there?
Washington's interesting. They have a strong defensive front. So you do wonder if this is going to be something where we're hearing a lot of, Tua doesn't have a lot of time to throw the ball. We see Liam Eichenberg taking 18 steps backwards on every single snap. But also, I want to flip the script the other way and say Washington's 3 wide receiver sets, how they use a rookie quarterback and how they spread the field, because I think that's where teams took advantage of the Dolphins last year when you could spread the field out wide, maybe isolate a Kader Kohu on a Stephon Diggs is something I think about. So seeing how the Dolphins can win in one-on-one matchups against that Washington Commanders offense that has a lot of playmakers, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, who can win one-on-one, I think that'll be fun to see, and I think that'll be another one where I don't know, maybe we could get some drone clips of people going up skying for some balls, things like that. That could be some fun.
Yeah, speaking of which, that's one of the coolest things that the Falcons do. I know we're talking about the Commanders now, but they always have that like zip line camera. So, yeah, man, I would love to see some drone shots. I was going to say Jayden Daniels just because I'm kind of hyped for what he can do as a quarterback. So I guess that would be my answer. But another thing that I want to keep an eye on is I can't remember if Omar Kelly actually said this as a rumor. I don't think he did, but it was going around the Dolphins could have interest in maybe Jonathan Allen, the defensive tackle, veteran defense tackle for the Commanders. So, if there were some smoke there, those two teams would definitely be discussing a trade during these joint practices. So something to keep an eye on. But I want to see the rookie Jayden Daniels and how he performs, because that's a guy that we're talking fantasy football, best ball, and things like that. I'm pretty damn hyped for what he can do with, like you said, a loaded offense at his disposal.
And with Jayden Daniels too, mobile quarterback. How is this Anthony Weaver defense going to do in a division that has Josh Allen? Drake May is expected to be a running quarterback. Tyrod Taylor, if he starts for the Jets, he's a mobile quarterback.
EJ Manuel's out there somewhere just lingering. Where's my chance?
Oh God, Ben, you're bringing back the nightmares. But yeah, those begin on August 15th, my birthday, so that's always kind of cool. That'll be fun to watch. And then finally, the Dolphins have to take a long voyage to play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to practice against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this might sound like a cop-out, man, but that Bucs team, they are going to be throwing the football a lot. Baker Mayfield to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Let's see it, man. Pro Football Focus said that the Dolphins have a top 10 cornerback room. This is going to be not right before the season, but this is going to be our last chance to see these Miami Dolphin players on a field. Let's see how they do. Can Kendall Fuller and Jalen Ramsey keep up with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans when everyone is fully healthy and just out there practicing play after play with Baker Mayfield throwing them the ball, That could be a lot of fun. I think that would be a real defining moment of the preseason, will be if the Dolphins can kind of, again, there's going to be some highlight clips no matter what happens, but if we don't hear a lot from Mike Evans and Chris Godwin that week, I think we should be pretty excited that maybe Pro Football Focus was onto something with how good this cornerback unit could be.
Yeah, and that's Baker Mayfield, Tyreek Hill's top 5 quarterback? Isn't he one of Tyreek Hill's top 5 quarterbacks?
Oh, that's a good point.
I was gonna joke this is Shaq Barrett's revenge joint practice or whatever. I mean, they don't. When I keep him there, he's gonna be having an early role if Bradley Chubb ends up on PUP like we kind of anticipate. So let's see what Shaq Barrett can do against his former team. That would be my joking thing to watch. But yeah, man, lots of awesome battles, and again, it just is so cool that we're finally here, right? We talked about this all season, this long lull that we had. It really didn't feel that way, man. It was nice to come on here, chat with you, read off some of the viewers' questions, and get through that little hiatus that we had. And now we're back, baby. Dolphins football is on the horizon.
One final question here, Joshua, before I wrap up here. When we think about these joint practices, I think about reading the tweets, building excitement. And then, if we go back, I think it was 2022 where you had the Eagles and the Dolphins were even talking like, wow, like we're both stacked teams. We might meet each other in the Super Bowl. Sadly, we had the Tua Tagovailoa head injuries. And while the Eagles made the Super Bowl, the Dolphins didn't live up to it. However, we did see that path, right? We did see that energy. We saw that excitement. Joint practices, man, like the vibes around them have seemed to be very good. They've been fun and interesting to follow. And then you have preseason games where you have a scenario just last year. Miami Dolphins wide receiver Dawood Davis was immobilized and carted off the field following a collision in the fourth quarter against the Jacksonville Jaguars. There was 8 minutes left in that preseason game. It was the final preseason game of the year. Obviously, you have players going all out, trying to do everything they can to prove to coaches, let me get a spot. I'm a playmaker. I can hit hard, different things like that. Josh, I want to ask you, are joint practices just simply a better way to build and develop and prepare for the season and just kind of identify which 53 you want on the roster? Because I just think, man, looking at those preseason games, they're not going away. The NFL makes so much money, but it just seems like by that middle of the second quarter, even just nobody cares anymore, right? We turning them off. Maybe we're getting hyped for some of those rookies, different things like that. But when you think about those high pressure scenarios where everyone's trying to make a play late in the game and they're not the most talented or prepared players, injuries can happen. So I very long-winded way of asking you, do you see a pathway down the road where I don't think preseason games are going to go extinct because the NFL loves its money, but where the preseason games just flat out, even fans don't really care anymore just because everyone's getting so much value out of just the joint practices and what they see in those?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, at this point, I don't even know that fans truly, get enamored by it, right? A lot of us, we watch it because we're diehards. We come in here and talk about it. We got to watch these camp battles. But the average fan, I don't know that they really care about some of those camp battles. So I could absolutely see this happening. I definitely think it's a safer approach, right? I mean, you're talking about these two teams competing at camp. I mean, they're not really tackling, doing some of those things that they might in a game. And let's be honest, some of those guys that are competing in camp aren't the ones that you're seeing out there at preseason. So I have no issue if they were to move it down to maybe 2 games, and those are mostly just players that are fighting for those spots that you want to see go out there and compete for roster spots or compete for a starting spot and things like that. So yeah, man, I absolutely think that's the way it's going, and I guess it's probably going to be here sooner than expected, and I have no issues with that, especially with these joint practices and us being able to indulge and eat up all that content that comes in our exposure. Because let's be honest, Jake, this and these times are what, like you said, has got us inspired and became the fans that we are today.
Final note here, shout out Dawood Davis because he balled out in the UFL. He fully recovered, and he's currently on the Panthers 90-man roster, so we're rooting for him to see if he can secure a spot there. But that is it. That is all the time we have today on Another Dolphins podcast. I hope everyone out there has an awesome weekend. We will be back on Monday with a 53-man roster prediction. And Vets Report, we are going to have so much news coming out. We are going to keep you guys updated every step of the way. So thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. We will talk to you next time, but until then, fins up.
Fins up.